All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of That's All Funny. My guest today has discovered 17 insect species and has written two books, one on baseball and the other we'll be talking about today called The Six Pack on the Open Road in Search for WrestleMania. Brad Balukjian. Did I say that right?
You got it.
Balukjian. No, I'm glad. Thank you for being here today, sir.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no. So I know you're a man of many talents, with dealing with bugs, baseball, and wrestling. Growing up, did you always, as far as just like the book is concerned, the six pack, did you want to be a writer? Did you have any other aspirations or goals? I know you've done so many things.
Yeah, I didn't think about being a writer till I got into later in high school. As a little kid, the thing I love the most, I love nature. I grew up going outside and collecting insects and frogs and whatever else I could get my hands on. So I always knew I liked nature and biology. I also loved wrestling, watching on Saturday mornings. I loved baseball, reading the box scores every day in the paper. And it wasn't until I started taking some English classes in high school. And for me, fiction, creative writing never really appealed to me, but journalism was really fun for me because it was, I think knowing that everything I was writing had to be true. I enjoyed the reporting aspects of journalism, telling stories that are true stories, and then learning later on. I learned later on in college, taking magazine journalism classes, how to kind of spice up your writing and make it a little more engaging for the reader. And that's when I realized, I really want to write magazine stories or books or any kind of narrative nonfiction.
Oh yeah, and for this book, you go full Roncontour. Is that the term?
Yeah, I was right. I was hitting the road. I was driving all over. I always want to me, it's more interesting for the reader if I can take you along on the road with me and show you the places that I'm going, by describing the people that I meet and the things that I see. So I guess you could say it's kind of a cinematic style of writing.
No, it is great. I have read and really enjoyed it. I know in the six pack you talk about how you had started initially wanting to write a biography on the Iron Sheik, but it never came to be for reasons. I'll say,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
uh,
if you read the book, you see why it didn't happen. Right? It
yeah, for
threatened
reasons.
to kill me. Yeah.
Do you think if you had written that biography, this kind of book, this book particularly, would never been written?
No, this would never have happened if that book had been successful. I guess it's kind of a lesson in life of don't necessarily consider your failures to be failures, right? Like when that Iron Sheik biography fell apart in 2005, I was 24, 25 years old. I was really upset. I was really depressed that didn't work. And for a long time, I had a really hard time letting go of that. And it's interesting that once I had let go of it, ironically, now the situation presented itself where I could actually write a book about that experience, but make it something bigger and bring in other wrestlers and talk about bigger themes than just the Iron Sheik, but talk about that whole era of wrestling and the sacrifices those guys made and the effect that those sacrifices had on their families or their personal lives, and um, really write something about professional wrestling that's much bigger than any one wrestler.
Yeah, so him threatening to kill you was
A blessing in disguise.
yeah,
Yeah.
an opportunity, a
Yeah, I didn't know
failure.
I didn't feel that way at the time, but 17 years later, it paid off.
And that's pretty much what this book is kind of saying, in my opinion. They say, never meet your heroes, and
Right.
that's kind of what goes on here. Is there anything you'd go back and do differently with meeting the wrestlers you talk about in this book? Like, did you have any really low moments or really proud moments that you could highlight in this adventure?
Well, I think um, there were disappointments. Like I wish I had had a chance to sit down and really talk to Hulk Hogan, but that was out of my control. Um, I think that when those disappointments happened, I did my best to write about the experience. Just be honest about, okay, here's what I tried. Here's everything I tried to do to talk to Hulk Hogan, and here's why it didn't work. And here's what I did instead. Right, I went and met his childhood friends or um, people that he was in a rock band with, and those were voices that you haven't heard much from in the past when people have covered Hulk Hogan. So, the book is also as much about the people behind the wrestlers, right? So Terry Bollea is the real person. Hulk Hogan is a fictional character, and I was interested in writing more about Terry Bollea than Hulk Hogan, or kind of what you're in this world of make believe, but you're going back and forth with real life. And how does somebody do that, right? You and I can't really relate to that. We're always ourselves
Mhm.
in general. So this is a pretty weird profession where these guys had to live these characters.
No, definitely, and I'm not sure if you keep up with the current state of wrestling,
A little bit,
uh,
yeah.
but what do you think made wrestling, like you said, like, more mystique, magical back, in the early '90s and before that?
Well, I think the fact that they didn't openly admit that it was a show created this desire to, okay, like, can that really be, is that real, or is that, we kind of analyze. It's like watching a magic show, right? Like you watch a magic show and you're like, how do they do that? But you know that it's not real magic. Um, I think wrestling, to its credit, has evolved in a way that still there's an element of realism, or an element of, I mean, everyone knows it's a show, but where they've been really smart to evolve wrestling now is that because everyone is quote unquote smart about the business, they'll draw on real life stuff, right? Like maybe two guys have a real life feud over something, and they'll write that into the storyline so that when you're watching the show, you're like, oh, maybe he really does hate that guy, right? Or
Mhm.
all the work shoot stuff, and the way they've incorporated sort of the real life into the storylines is smart, because it's allowed wrestling to continue to play with people's suspension of disbelief and their question around, okay, what is real?
Yeah, it's almost, inverted now, the way,
Yeah,
they were playing pretend, or I mean, with all due respect to kayfabe, they were playing pretend. Now it's more, "Oh, we're living the real life. This is real life we're living."
yeah,
Uh,
and it always when critics would say like, oh, wrestling's, it's all a show, it's not a real competition, and that always bothered me, because yeah, like, we know that the winners and losers are predetermined, but being in the top spot definitely meant you made more money than being lower down the card, right? So it was very, like, the battle for placement on the card, was that competition was very real. And so, when they were back in the steroid era, when you talk about, like, well, who cares if they're using steroids, because again, it's not like you're hitting home runs, and you're not competing in that way, but in a way you are, because if you have a bigger body and you're, more jacked, and back in that time, Vince McMahon was more likely to give you a push, right? So
oh, yeah.
it did enhance your performance, because in wrestling, it's as much about your look and your microphone skills and your work rate as it is, who wins or loses.
No, definitely, and, I was gonna ask, on the other subjects you got with bugs, what's the, scariest of the 17 insect species you've
Well,
discovered?
it's funny because they're all really closely related to each other, so they're not that different, because they all evolved on the same island. So it's kind of like if you remember back to your high school biology, learning about evolution and the Galapagos Islands, and you get all these birds that are on these islands that are different from each other, but they're all from the same ancestor. So it's not like you got one bug that's giant and terrifying and the other bug that's meek and small. They're all kind of close to each other. And they're not, I got to say, these are like the brontosaurus of insects. These are not the Tyrannosaurus Rex types. They're not scary. They don't bite people. they're small and pretty and green and pink, and so from that perspective, I think they're very appealing. But I get, hey, not everyone's a bug guy. I get that.
Oh yeah, and how did you go about doing that? Were you searching for them, or did you just stumble upon them? I know when you hear the word discovered,
Right.
uh, it sounds sort of like that, like, oh wow,
How does
that's
that happen? Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, when we say discovered, what we mean is that the first time that scientists have collected them and studied them and realized that they're unique species. I mean, they've been there for millions of years, and I'm sure they're very small, so I'm sure people have seen them before. But the way you know that they're new species is it took me 7 years to get my PhD. So I went off to Tahiti in the South Pacific, and I was climbing these volcanic islands and going to these really remote places where very few people have studied insects. And literally, you're sometimes you're shaking a tree and you're collecting all these bugs that fall out, and then you don't know till much later when you take them back and you extract their DNA and look at their genetics and you put them under the microscope and you look at them, in very high magnification, and you compare them to all the other specimens that are in museums, then you realize, oh, okay, like no one's ever seen these before. And then you have to go about like formally describing them, which is a whole nother process. That's just a lot of time and a lot of patience.
I mean, it sounds interesting in the whole another avenue compared
Yeah,
to
you're right. It's a whole nother part of my brain. I mean,
uh,
it's fun, man. You like climb. I mean, going to remote islands. It's like very Indiana Jones. You're going up to these remote places, and it's sort of like old fashioned science, but it's still very exciting because you're discovering new things.
yeah, it's almost like archaeology,
Yeah,
almost,
yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. Uh, who's your favorite baseball player? And separate question, or it could be the same. What baseball player would make a great promo for a wrestler?
A great pro, yeah. Well, so my first book was called The Wax Pack, and it's about tracking down all these guys in a pack of baseball cards from 1986. And the common theme between my books is that I always liked whether they're wrestlers or baseball players, I like the guys that were not the most popular. So like the Iron Sheik was definitely not, most people's favorite wrestler back in the 80s. And similarly, I liked the baseball players that were the underdog kind of guys. So there's a guy named Don Carmen who was not a great player, but because he played for my favorite team, the Phillies, and he was not a star, I gravitated towards him, and he kind of became the star of that book, The Wax Pack. In terms of promo, well, I was watching the All-Star game the other night with my dad, and we were watching. He's retired, but like I just love listening to David Ortiz on commentary, and Pedro Martinez. Those guys are so funny and such characters. So I think those guys would be really good promo guys. But also Bryce Harper would be, I think, a really good promo guy because he's just got so much drive and personality and flair. I think he has what it takes.
Oh, that's great. What advice would you give to first time writers who may have been discouraged, like when you were first writing and
Yeah.
it didn't go as planned with your
Well,
first
right,
book?
and so especially with my first book, The Wax Pack. I mean, it's been written about elsewhere that that book took forever to get published. I got rejected 38 times and was left for dead, in terms of getting published. And I didn't give up. And so my advice for writers is to always be honest with yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. Like if you're interested, if you're writing something because you want to make a lot of money and become a professional writer, that's a very different thing than writing something because you want to get your story out there and you just want to see it get published. So I would say be honest with yourself about what your intention is in doing the writing. Write about stuff that is so personal and so you're so passionate about that it doesn't feel like work. You have to have just an incredible amount of curiosity and drive to write about what you want to write about and have that passion. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to persevere through all the rejection you're inevitably going to face. Um, so those are my, I guess, my two biggest points, and do your, do your homework. Like, don't jump in thinking that you can just show up and do it. Like, understand the market of whatever you're trying to write, what else has been done, um, who can help you along your way. Like, people are generally really helpful if you are just, you just ask and you show some humility and some, earnestness.
Yeah, I know it sounded like every time you met someone in the book on the six pack, you were very respectable. Hey, I'm here to ask this. If you don't want to, no worries. Or you tried to get a hold of them another way. So yeah, I saw that respect that you always had
Yeah,
for
I mean, I
everyone.
think I try to, um, be. I never want to write something just to be salacious or to get some dirt. Right? It's like it has to serve some bigger meaning of the story, and whatever I'm doing, I try to write in a detailed and balanced way, and to be fair to people. Right? I think that's huge. And whether you're writing about somebody or just meeting people and how you treat them, being fair is so important.
Yeah, and that's fair in all parts, not just writing now, but just being a human.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
And
just a fair
being,
thing.
respectful and nice and friendly, it's actually not that hard, and it goes a long way.
um, there's a word you speak of in the book, Javanmardi. I don't know if
Oh
I'm
yeah,
saying that
yeah.
right.
Farsi
What
word, yeah.
what does this word mean to you at this point now?
Well, I think I use that word. So the word is a Farsi word. So the Farsi is the Iranian language, and so in Farsi, Javanmardi refers to like a sense of manners and chivalry and respect. And I focus on that word because the Iron Sheik, later in life, the version of the Iron Sheik that a lot of us saw on Twitter, and who was just unhinged, crazy, swearing and going off the handle, was so different from the Khosrow Vaziri, that's his real name, that I had read about and I had seen in glimpses when I first met him, and talking to his daughter and his wife. And they would always describe him, when he was before all the drug issues, as such a polite guy that was so careful about manners and respect, that Javan Mardi idea. And so that word was a nice way for me to depict the two sides, the Jekyll and Hyde of the Iron Sheik, right? And it was really nice to see him kind of come full circle, that when I met him again in 2022, that he was kind of back to his real self. He had gotten off the drugs, and he had kind of returned to his real self.
No, that's great. That's great to see that he, before his passing, he
Yeah.
became
I mean, we all like a good happy ending, right? And there was no, believe me, I didn't think for a long time that we would get it with the Iron Sheik, but it was really nice how it all worked out.
and he still lives on too, I imagine, with his Twitter account. I think
Well,
so.
yeah, his people are still, he's being retweeted from the beyond, right? There's
No, it's beautiful. No, thank you so much for your time, Brad. I appreciate it. I got your QR code here
Oh, cool.
with
Thank you.
your website where
Yeah,
everyone can find your book. I know I ordered my copy on Amazon and I loved
awesome.
it. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
it's always good to see people still reading the hard copies. I'm a big fan of the physical book.
oh yeah, and you even read, I know you read the audiobook, which I saw
Yeah.
pretty interesting, but then I think I saw you were like, "Oh, the audiobook, it's only so much of this," and I was like,
Oh, well,
I'll
I
get
was, I was trying to talk about the economics of being a writer, right? And it's unfortunately, audiobooks don't get as good of a share of sales as you do in print books. So as a trying to make a living, it's always nice to see people getting the print book. But I mean, I'm flattered whenever anyone reads or listens to any of my stuff. So um,
well, no, yeah, no, I want everyone should, pick up this book. It's on Amazon. It's everywhere else books are sold, I imagine. It's even on
yeah,
your web page.
yeah, you can
Uh,
pretty much find it anywhere. Yeah.
No, and I want to thank you for the time today. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll talk to everyone next time. Everyone,
All right,
take
man.
care.
Be in
Bye.
touch. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye.